If someone had asked me 3 years ago whether I trusted my wife, I would have laughed at the question. Not because I thought our marriage was perfect, but because trust was the one thing I never questioned. We would been married for 11 years, 2 kids, a mortgage, a routine so predictable that entire weeks sometimes passed without anything memorable happening. I worked in project management for a construction company. My wife, Emily, was a regional healthcare administrator. She was organized, intelligent, respected by everyone who met her. The kind of woman teachers loved. The kind of mother other parents quietly compared themselves to. If our marriage had a problem, it was probably the same problem most long marriages have. Life became logistics, schedules, school pickups, soccer practice, laundry, work emails at midnight. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. At least that's what I thought. Looking back now, I can identify the exact moment everything began. Not because it was dramatic, because it was so unbelievably small. A receipt. A receipt for coffee. I found it while cleaning out my wife's car. The receipt showed a purchase at a cafe nearly 40 miles away, on a Tuesday, at 2:17 p.m. The strange thing was not the coffee. The strange thing was her location. According to everything she would told me, she was in a budget review meeting that afternoon. I remember staring at the receipt for maybe 10 seconds before laughing at myself. People travel, meetings get moved, not exactly evidence of a secret life. I threw the receipt away. I wish I had not, because over the next few months, little things started piling up. Tiny inconsistencies, the kind that seem ridiculous when viewed individually, but impossible to ignore when viewed together. One evening, she mentioned having dinner with her coworker Rachel. A week later, Rachel stopped by our house. During conversation, she casually mentioned she had not seen Emily in almost 3 weeks. I noticed it immediately, then immediately talked myself out of it. People forget dates. Memory is not perfect. No big deal, except it kept happening. Small contradictions, tiny timeline problems, stories that shifted, details that changed. Nothing major, just enough to make me pause. Then there were the missing hours. Emily started arriving home later, not every night, just often enough to be noticeable. Her explanations always sounded reasonable. Unexpected meetings, staffing issues, emergency calls. Healthcare administration is chaotic. I accepted every explanation, because why would not I? She was my wife. Then came Thanksgiving, the first moment that genuinely unsettled me. We hosted dinner at our house. Family everywhere, kids running through hallways, football on television, normal holiday chaos. At one point, Emily's phone buzzed while she was helping in the kitchen. I was not trying to snoop. The screen simply lit up beside me. A message preview appeared. Only 6 words. Did you tell him anything yet? No name, just a number. I remember staring at those 6 words, trying to understand the context. Then Emily appeared beside me. For the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine panic cross her face. Just for a second, gone almost instantly. She grabbed the phone, smiled, said it was a work issue, then changed the subject so smoothly I almost questioned whether I would imagine her reaction. Almost. Later that night, after everyone left, I asked about the text. Nothing accusatory, just curiosity. Her response surprised me. She became defensive immediately, not angry, defensive. She asked why I was monitoring her messages, asked whether I trusted her, asked whether she was allowed to have private conversations. Within 10 minutes, I found myself apologizing. The conversation somehow became about my behavior, not hers. At the time, I accepted it. Now I see it differently, because that was not the strange part. The strange part happened 3 days later. I checked our phone records for an unrelated billing issue, and I noticed something odd. The number from Thanksgiving was not saved in our family account contacts, yet it had appeared dozens of times. Calls, texts, months of activity. The same number, over and over. And according to the records, most of those conversations happened during hours Emily claimed to be at work. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the screen, trying to come up with a harmless explanation, trying desperately not to become the kind of husband who invents problems. Then I noticed something else. The number disappeared completely every weekend. No calls, no texts, nothing. Monday through Friday, constant communication. Weekends, silence, as if whoever owned it existed only during part of her life. That night I searched the number, and what I found raised a question that would eventually destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The number was not registered to a person. It was registered to an address I had never seen before. I did not sleep much the night I found the address. Not because I thought I would uncovered some massive secret. At that point, I was still trying to prove myself wrong. The address belonged to a small commercial building on the opposite side of the city. Nothing remarkable. No company name I recognized. No connection to Emily's employer. No obvious reason for her to have any relationship with it. Still, I kept telling myself there had to be one. People do not build entire double lives. Not in real life. Not people like my wife. The next morning I almost forgot about it. Work was busy. Deadlines piled up. The kids needed rides. Life resumed. Then Emily mentioned she had another late meeting, and for the first time in 11 years, I caught myself wondering whether she was lying. That thought bothered me more than the address. Trust had always been automatic between us. Now I was questioning things before she even finished speaking. Over the following weeks, I started noticing something uncomfortable. Whenever I asked simple questions about her schedule, she became irritated. Not always, not dramatically, just enough to discourage further discussion. How was the meeting? Long sigh. Tiring. Who attended? Why does that matter? Just asking. Do I need to submit a report every time I leave the house? That became a pattern. Small questions somehow became evidence that I was being controlling. And because I hated conflict, I usually backed off. Looking back, I can see how effective it was. The argument would shift away from the missing information and toward my behavior. Eventually, I stopped asking, not because I got answers, because I got consequences. Then another inconsistency appeared. This one involved money. We shared finances, always had. Neither of us hid purchases. Neither of us cared much about spending. One Saturday, I was categorizing expenses for taxes when I noticed recurring withdrawals. Nothing huge, several $100s each month. Always cash, always from different ATMs. At first I assumed they were household expenses. Maybe Emily preferred carrying cash, except she rarely used cash. I knew that because she constantly complained whenever restaurants did not accept cards. When I asked about the withdrawals, she answered immediately. Too immediately. School fundraiser stuff. What fundraiser? You know, PTA things. I did not know, but before I could ask more, she became visibly frustrated. You do not trust me lately. The conversation ended there. And then, a week later I volunteered at the school. Fair coincidence. While talking with one of the PTA coordinators, I casually mentioned fundraising expenses. She looked confused. The school had not held a fundraiser in nearly a year. I remember standing there feeling foolish, not angry, not suspicious, just confused. Maybe Emily meant something else. Maybe she would forgotten. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. That explanation lasted exactly 4 days. Because 4 days later I accidentally met someone who recognized my wife, and the encounter should have been impossible. I was attending a supplier conference downtown. During a lunch break, a woman approached me, mid-40s, friendly, confident. She smiled and asked how Emily was doing. I told her Emily was fine. The woman laughed. Still spending all her time over there? I asked what she meant. The woman looked surprised, then uncomfortable. Sorry, I assumed you knew. No was. Her smile disappeared. She glanced away. It's nothing. Then she practically fled the conversation. I never even got her name. For the rest of the day I replayed the exchange, still spending all her time over there. Over where? What had she assumed I knew? That night I asked Emily whether she knew someone matching the woman's description. The reaction was immediate. Too immediate. Emily froze. Just for a second. Then she said no. Flatly. Absolutely. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No curiosity. Just no. I described the woman. Emily repeated that she would never met her. End of discussion. The problem was that I knew she was lying. Not because I had proof. Because of something absurdly simple. The woman had approached me by name. My full name. She knew where I worked. She knew I was Emily's husband. And somehow Emily expected me to believe they would never met. For the first time, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just dates. Comments. Odd events. Contradictions. A private timeline. I told myself it was temporary, just until everything made sense. I had no idea that timeline would eventually stretch back years, or that one entry would connect to an argument from 6 years earlier. An argument I thought we would resolve. An argument I suddenly realized might have happened for a completely different reason than the one Emily gave me. And when I found an old email buried in an archive folder, I discovered that the timeline of her lies may have started long before our marriage ever began. The email contained only one sentence that raised a terrifying possibility. Emily had hidden something from me before she ever became my wife, and someone else knew it. The email was nearly 13 years old, older than our marriage. older than our first apartment, older than our oldest child. I found it by accident while searching archived files for tax documents. At first glance, it looked insignificant. No attachment, no conversation thread, just a single message sent from an account I did not recognize to one of Emily's old email addresses. The subject line was blank. The body contained only one sentence. "You cannot keep pretending this never happened." That was it. No signature, no context, no explanation. Most people would probably have ignored it. I should have ignored it. Instead, I spent the next 3 hours trying to figure out why a 13-year-old email suddenly bothered me so much. The answer was not the message itself. It was the date. The email had been sent 3 weeks before Emily and I got engaged. At that point in our relationship, there should not have been any major unresolved issues, at least none that I knew about. Yet someone clearly believed she was hiding something. I wanted to ask her directly. That was still my instinct. Communication, honesty, adult conversation, by experience, had taught me something over the previous few months. Every time I asked a question, the discussion somehow became about my behavior rather than the missing information. So for the first time in our marriage, I decided not to ask. Instead, I started verifying. I began reviewing old records, not because I thought I was uncovering a conspiracy. I simply wanted reality, something objective, something that did not depend on explanations. That's when I found the first piece of actual evidence. Not suspicion, not intuition. Evidence. It started with our family calendar archives. Years ago, Emily had insisted we use a shared scheduling app. Birthdays, appointments, school events, vacations. Everything went into the calendar. The records stretched back almost a decade. As I reviewed them, a strange pattern emerged. Every 6 to 8 weeks, Emily had a recurring work-related event. Different names, different descriptions, different locations. Yet they almost always occurred on Fridays. Almost always lasted between 4 and 6 hours, and almost always resulted in her coming home unusually late. The events looked random until I mapped them together. Then they looked deliberate, because despite the changing descriptions, the locations formed a cluster. One specific area of the city, the same area where the mysterious address was located. I remember staring at the map on my monitor, my stomach tightening. For months I had been telling myself these were isolated coincidences. Now I was looking at a pattern, and patterns are harder to dismiss. Still, I was not ready to jump to conclusions. Then another piece fell into place. The cash withdrawals. I exported several years of bank records. An exhausting process. Hours of spreadsheets. Dates, amounts, locations. When I overlaid the withdrawal dates onto the calendar entries, the correlation was immediate. Most withdrawals occurred within 24 hours of those recurring Friday events. Sometimes the same day, sometimes the night before, but almost always connected. At this point, I was not asking whether something was happening. Something clearly was. The question had become what? A few days later, I got my first real break, and it came from someone who had no idea they were helping me. My friend Marcus. We have known each other since college. One of the few people I trusted completely. Over beers one evening, I casually mentioned the address. Not the affair suspicion, not the lies, just the building. Marcus frowned, then said something that made my blood run cold. "I have been there." I laughed, asked why. His answer changed everything. About 2 years earlier, he had delivered materials to a tenant operating inside the building. A small consulting business. Nothing unusual. Except Marcus remembered the office because it had almost no signage, no public website, no obvious clients, just a leased space hidden inside the building. What was the company called? He could not remember, but he promised to check old invoices. 3 days later, he called me. I still remember exactly where I was standing when my phone rang. A hardware store parking lot. Saturday afternoon. Kids in the back seat. Normal life continuing around me. Marcus sounded uneasy, very uneasy. He told me he would found the invoice, found the company, found the tenant. Then he asked a question that made no sense. Why did not you tell me Emily was connected to this? I nearly dropped the phone. What are you talking about? Long silence. Then Marcus said something I will never forget. Because according to the paperwork, your wife signed the lease. I felt the world tilt. Not because she rented an office, because she had never once mentioned it. Not to me, not to anyone, at least as far as I knew. The lease had been active for almost 7 years. 7 years. A property, a contract, a financial obligation, an entire location, and somehow I had never heard about it. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the name listed beside hers. The second person on the lease. Oh wow, and I recognized the name immediately. Because 6 years earlier, Emily had told me he was dead. The name on the lease was Daniel Mercer. For several minutes after Marcus told me, I just sat in my car staring through the windshield. I knew that name, not vaguely, not from some distant memory. I knew it immediately, because 6 years earlier Emily had cried while telling me about him. According to her, Daniel had been an old friend from college, someone she would lost touch with after graduation. Then, years later, she would heard he died in a car accident. I remembered the conversation because it was unusually emotional. She spent nearly an hour talking about how fragile life was, how people disappear without warning, how important it was to appreciate the people we love. At the time, I thought it was a touching conversation. Now I was looking at a lease agreement signed years after his supposed death. Either the lease was fraudulent, or Emily had lied. I did not tell her what I would found. Instead, I started digging into Daniel Mercer. The internet gave me answers almost immediately. No obituary, no death records, no accident reports, no memorial pages, nothing. The man was very much alive. In fact, he owned a consulting company, the same consulting company leasing the hidden office. I must have stared at his business profile for 10 minutes, because suddenly everything seemed obvious. The late nights, the secret phone number, the lies, the hidden property, the cash withdrawals. For the first time, I believed I understood the mystery. There was another man, and he had been around for years. I wish that had been the truth. It would have made things so much simpler. The following week became an obsession. I tracked schedules, compared timelines, reviewed records. For the first time, I deliberately verified one of Emily's work meetings. She claimed she would be attending a regional planning session until 8 p.m. At 6:30 p.m., I drove past the venue. The parking lot was empty. The building was closed. No meeting existed. I sat there for almost an hour, not because I expected to catch her, because I could not process what I was seeing. My wife had looked me in the eyes and fabricated an entire event, without hesitation, without visible guilt, without any sign she expected to be questioned. That realization hurt more than the suspected affair, because it meant deception had become normal, routine, practiced. Then came the first accidental encounter, the one that nearly exposed everything. I was driving home from a client meeting when I saw Emily's car. At first I thought nothing of it. Then I noticed where she was. She was pulling into the parking garage attached to the secret office building. My heart nearly stopped. I parked across the street and watched. 10 minutes later, a man entered through the side entrance. Dark hair, mid-40s, confident, familiar. It took me several seconds to realize why. I would seen his photograph earlier that week. Daniel Mercer, the supposedly dead man. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. Finally, an answer. A real answer. I watched for nearly 2 hours. Neither of them emerged. Then something happened I was not prepared for. A woman approached my vehicle, knocked on the passenger window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. She appeared to be in her 60s, nervous, looking around repeatedly. I lowered the window slightly. The first thing she said was, "You are Emily's husband, or not you?" I froze. She looked terrified, as if she would already made a mistake. I asked who she was. She refused to answer. Instead, she handed me a folded piece of paper. Then she walked away, almost running. By the time I got out of the car, she had disappeared into the crowd. Inside the folded paper was a handwritten sentence. Only one sentence. The exact same sentence. The sentence from the 13-year-old email. "You cannot keep pretending this never happened." And beneath it was a date. A date from 14 years ago. Several months before Emily and I even met. At night, I could not think about anything else. Not Daniel. Not the affair. Not the lies. The date. Because after hours of searching old records, yearbooks, social media archives, and public databases, I discovered something disturbing. Something that made the entire affair theory feel incomplete. The date corresponded to a specific event, a local charity gala, one Emily had supposedly never attended, one she would explicitly told me she knew nothing about. Yet according to archived photographs, she was there, standing beside Daniel Mercer, and standing beside a third person, someone whose face made my stomach drop, because I recognized him instantly, not from Emily's past, from my own family, one of my relatives, someone I trusted completely, someone who, as far as I knew, had never met my wife before our wedding. Suddenly the affair was not the biggest mystery anymore. The biggest mystery was this: how had my wife known a member of my family years before she ever met me? And why had they both hidden it? The man in the photograph was my uncle, Robert, not a distant relative, not someone I saw once every few years. Robert was family. The kind of family who attended birthdays, graduations, and holidays. The kind who helped me move into my first apartment. The kind who stood beside me at my wedding. And according to everything I would ever been told, he would never met Emily until I introduced her to the family. Yet there he was, standing beside her 14 years earlier, smiling for a camera, looking completely comfortable. I must have examined that photograph 100 times. The image was not blurry. There was no possibility of mistaken identity. It was Robert. It was Emily. And it was Daniel Mercer. Together, years before my wife supposedly entered my life. At first, I considered confronting Robert immediately. But something stopped me. Every major discovery so far had led to a bigger mystery. I was beginning to understand that I was not looking at isolated lies. I was looking at a system, a structure, and structures do not reveal themselves through impulsive confrontations. So I waited. Instead, I expanded the timeline. By now, my notes filled an entire notebook. Dates, addresses, financial records, names, connections, contradictions, patterns that seemed impossible until they repeated enough times to become undeniable. The more I mapped Emily's life, the stranger it became. One detail stood out. Whenever the mysterious Friday events occurred, she almost never posted on social media. That sounds insignificant. It was not. Emily documented everything. Family trips, school events, weekend activities, birthday dinners. Photos appeared constantly, except on those specific Fridays. Those days simply vanished. No photos, no posts, no check-ins, nothing. Almost as if an entirely different person existed during those hours. Then I discovered something hidden inside our financial records. Not a secret account. Something stranger. For 7 years, a small utility payment had been leaving our joint account every month. The amount barely changed. Most people would never notice it. I certainly had not. The payment was not attached to our house. It was not attached to any property I recognized. The billing address matched the office building. At first that seemed straightforward. Maybe it was simply connected to the lease. Then I pulled the utility records, and everything changed again. Because the payment was not for the office. It was for a residential unit, an apartment, a completely separate address. I checked it 3 times, then 4, then 10. The apartment existed, the bill existed, the payments existed, and according to public records, the leaseholder was not Daniel Mercer. The leaseholder was Emily. My wife had been paying utilities on another residence for years, a residence I had never heard of. I remember sitting at my kitchen table after midnight, staring at the documents, trying to understand what I was looking at. And if it made sense. People cheat, people lie, people make terrible decisions. But maintaining an entirely separate residence for years, that required planning, money, organization, intent. This was not recklessness. This was architecture. The next breakthrough came from pure luck. An accidental witness, a retired maintenance worker named Harold. After several days of research, I learned he would service the apartment building for years. I approached him carefully, never mentioning Emily directly, just asking about a tenant. His response shocked me. He recognized her immediately, not by name. By description, professional woman, mid-40s, usually came alone. I felt my pulse spike. Then he added something even stranger, though not always. I asked what he meant. Harold frowned, thinking, then shrugged. Sometimes there was a younger woman. That answer hit me harder than I expected. A younger woman? Not Daniel, not a lover, someone else? I asked if he knew who she was. He did not, but he remembered one thing very clearly. The younger woman and Emily looked remarkably alike. At first I assumed he meant mother and daughter. Then I realized that made no sense. Our daughter was far too young. Emily had no sisters. At least none I would ever met. At least none she would ever mention. That night I barely slept. Every answer was producing larger questions. The affair no longer explained the apartment. The apartment no longer explained Robert. Robert did not explain the email. The email did not explain the hidden woman. I felt like I was assembling a puzzle from different boxes. Then Christmas arrived, and with it came the discovery that shattered what little certainty I still had. Because during a family gathering, while everyone else was opening gifts, my cousin accidentally revealed a piece of information she assumed I already knew. A piece of information that immediately connected Emily, Robert, Daniel Mercer, and the mysterious younger woman. And the moment I heard it, I realized someone in my family had been lying to me for years. Maybe all of them. The worst part, the person who revealed it had absolutely no idea she was exposing a secret. The revelation happened on Christmas morning, the kind of moment that would seem completely ordinary if it had not destroyed my understanding of reality. Our extended family was gathered in my mother's living room. Kids opening presents, coffee brewing, people talking over one another, normal holiday noise. My cousin Jenna was sitting beside Emily, flipping through old family photographs she would found while cleaning out boxes from her parents' attic. Nobody was paying much attention. Then Jenna laughed and held up a photograph. "You remember this?" I was not even looking. Then she said the sentence that stopped the entire world. "Funny how you and Emily knew Uncle Robert before either of you admitted it." The room continued moving. People talking, children laughing. But for me, everything froze. Emily's face lost color, only for a second. Then her smile returned. Too quickly, far too quickly. Jenna noticed nothing. She simply continued sorting through photographs. I heard myself ask a casual question. "What do you mean?" Jenna looked confused. "As in before you started dating." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Emily spoke. Immediately, "She's confused. Simple, confident, controlled." Exactly the kind of response I would expect from someone used to redirecting conversations. Jenna frowned. "No, I'm not." She began searching through the stack. A few seconds later she found the photograph. The same Charity Gale image I would already discovered, except this version showed more of the room, more people, more context, and one critical detail. Emily was not standing near Robert by accident. They were sitting together at the same table, the kind of arrangement that suggested familiarity, not coincidence. The room became awkward. Emily excused herself to the kitchen. Jenna looked between us, finally realizing something was wrong. My mother quickly changed the subject. Everybody followed her lead. The moment disappeared, at least publicly. Privately, it changed everything. Because I spent the rest of Christmas watching my family, really watching them, and I noticed something disturbing. Several relatives seemed unusually uncomfortable around Emily. Not hostile, not angry, just careful, like people avoiding a dangerous topic. The more I observed, the clearer it became. This was not new, it was practice. After everyone left, I confronted my mother. Not aggressively, directly. I showed her the photograph, asked how long she would known. The look on her face told me everything. Not the whole truth, but enough. She knew something. Unfortunately, she refused to explain. Her exact words still haunt me. "Some things are better left in the past." That was the moment I stopped treating this like a marriage problem. This had become a mystery involving multiple people. People willing to lie. People willing to stay silent. People willing to watch me build a life on top of hidden foundations. The next week, I visited the apartment, the secret property, the one Emily had maintained for years. I waited until a Friday afternoon, parked across the street. Watch it. At 3:12 p.m., Emily arrived. At 3:47 p.m., Daniel Mercer arrived. That alone would have confirmed the affair theory. Except what happened next destroyed it. At 4:05 p.m., a young woman entered the building, mid-20s, dark hair, same eyes as Emily, same posture, same smile. The resemblance was undeniable. I remember physically leaning forward in my seat, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Because Harold had been right, they looked related, very related. An hour later they emerged together. Emily, Daniel, the young woman, the three of them acting like a family. Comfortable, familiar, connected. Then something happened that nearly exposed me. The young woman looked directly toward my car. Our eyes met. For one terrifying second, I thought she recognized me, thought the investigation was over. Instead, she simply frowned, as though I reminded her of someone. Then they drove away. I followed. Not Daniel, not Emily, the young woman. She eventually stopped at a small coffee shop. I waited, trying to decide whether I was crossing a line, trying to decide whether I even cared anymore. Then I noticed something sitting on the passenger seat of her car, a university parking permit, visible through the window. The name printed on it changed everything, not because I recognized it, because of the surname. The surname was not Daniel's, it was not Emily's, it was not mine, it was Robert's, my uncle's surname, my family's surname, the same surname I carried. I stood there staring through the glass, trying to understand what I was looking at, because if the permit was accurate, then the young woman was not just connected to Emily, she was connected to my family. And suddenly a horrifying possibility entered my mind, one that explained the apartment, the secrecy, the photograph, the email, the years of lies. A possibility so disturbing I spent 2 days refusing to believe it. Then Marcus uncovered a document that proved I could no longer avoid it. The young woman was not just connected to my family. She had been connected to my family since the day she was born. And according to the document, Emily had hidden that fact from me for our entire marriage. The document Marcus found was a birth certificate. Not the original, obviously. A certified copy obtained through a chain of public records requests and old contacts he had accumulated over the years. When he first called me, he sounded reluctant, as if he regretted digging any further. I understood why the moment he sent it. I stared at the screen for a full minute before reading the names a second time, then a third, then a fourth, because my brain refused to accept them. The young woman from the apartment was named Claire, 24 years old, born approximately 1 year before Emily and I met. Mother, Emily. Father, unknown. I remember feeling physically dizzy, not because Emily had a child, because she had never mentioned having one. Not once. Not during dating. Not during our engagement. Not during 11 years of marriage. Not during the births of our children. Not during any conversation about family, honesty, or our future. Nothing. An entire human being had been erased from the story of her life. Yet that was not the part that terrified me. The terrifying part was the surname. Claire carried Robert's surname, not legally adopted later. She was registered with it at birth, which meant Robert had been involved from the beginning. Suddenly pieces started moving. The charity gala, the old email, the apartment, the secrecy. Robert was not simply someone who knew Emily. He had been part of whatever happened before I entered her life. I wanted to confront him immediately. Instead, I called Marcus. For nearly 2 hours we rebuilt timelines, examined dates, compared records, tried to understand how all these people fit together. By midnight we reached a conclusion that seemed impossible. Robert was not Claire's father. The ages did not fit. The circumstances did not fit. The records did not fit. So why did Claire have his surname? That question led us toward the first person from Emily's hidden life who was willing to talk. A woman named Linda. I found her name buried inside old property documents connected to the apartment. At first she refused to meet. Then after hearing my name, she changed her mind. Her reaction alone scared me, because she sounded like someone who had been expecting this conversation for years. We met at a diner 2 towns away. Linda arrived nervous, constantly checking windows, scanning parking lots, watching entrances. The behavior seemed excessive until she started talking. The first thing she asked was, "How much do you know?" I answered honestly, "Not much." Her expression suggested otherwise. Then she said something that would permanently change the investigation. Emily always knew this day would come. Not might come, would come. As if exposure was not a possibility. As if it was inevitable. For the next hour, Linda carefully revealed pieces of the story. Never enough to complete the puzzle, just enough to make it larger. Emily had known Daniel for decades. Long before I met her. Long before the hidden apartment. Long before the lease. That was not surprising anymore. Then Linda revealed something else. Daniel had never been the center of the secret. He was only one participant in something that involved multiple people, including Robert, including Claire, including at least one other person Linda refused to name. I asked whether Emily and Daniel had been having an affair. Linda looked genuinely confused. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because the question seemed too small, too simple, too incomplete. That reaction frightened me more than any answer could have. Before leaving, Linda handed me an envelope. Inside were copies of photographs, old photographs, dozens of them. Emily, Daniel, Claire, Robert, various locations, various years, various events, an entire parallel history, one that had existed beside my marriage without my knowledge. Then I found the photograph, the one that changed everything. In it, Emily was holding a newborn baby. Claire, standing beside her was Robert. Standing beside him was another man, the fourth person, the person Linda refused to identify. I did not recognize him, but someone had written a note on the back. Only 3 words. 3 words that made my blood run cold. He must never know. I assumed the note referred to me. I was wrong. The next morning, Marcus called. His voice sounded different. Shaken. For the first time since this nightmare began, my loyal friend seemed genuinely afraid. Then he told me something I was not prepared to hear. He had finally identified the 4th man in the photograph. And according to everything he had discovered, the biggest lie was not the affair. It was not Claire. It was not the apartment. It was not even the secret life. The biggest lie was my relationship to all of them. Because the man in the photograph was not a stranger. He was someone connected directly to me. And if Marcus was right, the truth would force me to question the entire reason Emily entered my life in the first place. I drove to Marcus's house before sunrise. The entire trip felt unreal. For months, every answer had expanded the mystery. Now, I was approaching a revelation that seemed impossible. Marcus looked exhausted when he opened the door. He had not slept. Neither had I. Without saying much, he handed me a folder. Inside was a collection of records, property filings, archived photographs, old newspaper clippings, genealogical records, the kind of documents that seem meaningless until they are arranged in exactly the right order. Then Marcus pointed at a photograph. The fourth man, the one from the picture with baby Claire, the one Linda refused to identify. My stomach dropped, because I recognized him immediately, not personally, but from photographs, family photographs. The man was my father, who had died 8 years earlier. For several seconds I could not speak. The room felt silent. I kept waiting for Marcus to tell me there had been a mistake. There was not. Every record supported the identification. Every timeline matched. Every photograph aligned. My father knew Emily years before I met her. He knew Daniel. He knew Robert. And somehow he was connected to Claire. The realization hit me harder than discovering the affair. Harder than discovering the apartment. Harder than discovering the lies. Because my father had been one of the people I trusted most in life. And now he was sitting at the center of a secret he took to the grave. For the next several hours, Marcus and I reconstructed timelines. The picture became clearer and more disturbing. Emily had not accidentally crossed paths with my family before meeting me. She had been connected to them for years, not socially, not casually, deeply, consistently, repeatedly. That changed everything, because it introduced a terrifying question. Had our relationship itself been a coincidence? Or had I simply been the last person to learn a story that began long before I arrived? The answer came from someone I never expected. My Aunt Patricia, Robert's ex-wife, a woman who had remained mostly distant from family events for years. I contacted her reluctantly. At first she refused to speak. Then I mentioned Claire. Silence. Long silence. Finally she agreed to meet. The moment I arrived, I knew she had been carrying the secret for a long time. The relief on her face was almost painful, like someone finally allowed to set down a weight. Patricia began talking before I asked a single question. She told me Robert had spent years protecting Emily, not because they were romantically involved, because he felt responsible for a decision made decades ago, a decision involving my father. At this point, I stopped interrupting. I simply listened. According to Patricia, something significant had happened 25 years earlier. A scandal, not public, private, contained, hidden. A situation several people agreed never to discuss again. My father, Robert, Emily, Daniel. Of this, everyone involved had maintained silence ever since. I asked the obvious question. What happened? Patricia shook her head. Then she said something worse. I do not know everything, and I believed her. For the first time, I was speaking to someone who seemed genuinely frightened by the truth, not protective, not manipulative, afraid. Then she revealed the betrayal that devastated me. The person who had spent months helping me investigate. The person I would trusted completely. Marcus. He was not discovering these connections alongside me. He already knew some of them. Not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize names long before he admitted it. Enough to understand the family connections. Enough to realize the investigation was headed toward my father. When I confronted him later that evening, he admitted it immediately. No excuses. No denial. Years earlier, my father had briefly mentioned Emily's name to him. Nothing detailed. Nothing specific. Just enough that Marcus recognized it when the investigation began. He had not told me because he thought it was irrelevant. Then, once it became relevant, he did not know how. I should have been angry. Part of me was. But another part understood. Marcus had not betrayed me to protect himself. He would betray me because he was afraid of what we would uncover. The same fear I was beginning to feel. Because by then one fact had become impossible to ignore. Every road led back to my father. Not Daniel. Not Robert. My father. Then came the discovery that changed the entire story. A sealed storage unit. One that had been quietly maintained for more than 2 decades. One paid for by a trust connected to my father's estate. One containing boxes of documents, photographs, correspondence, and recordings. Evidence, history, answers, or so I thought. Because when we finally gained access, I discovered something far worse than an affair. Far worse than a secret child. Far worse than family betrayal. I discovered that Emily's hidden life was not separate from our marriage at all. In a way I never could have imagined, it had been connected to our marriage from the very beginning. And the reason would force me to rethink every year we spent together. The storage unit looked ordinary. A metal door, concrete floor, rows of dusty boxes. Nothing about it suggested it contained answers capable of dismantling an entire life. For almost an hour, Marcus and I sorted through records, tax documents, property files, old correspondence, photographs, audio cassettes. Most of it seemed disconnected, fragments without context. Then we found the journals, 3 leather-bound notebooks, all written by my father, dated across several years. I remember hesitating before opening the first one. Part of me still wanted an explanation that preserved something. My marriage, my family, my memories, anything. Instead, the journals destroyed every remaining illusion. The story began 25 years earlier, long before I met Emily, long before Claire, long before the apartment. According to my father's own words, Emily's family had experienced a catastrophic financial collapse. Business failures. That was it. The kind of crisis that permanently alters lives. Several families became entangled in the fallout, including mine, including Robert's, including Daniel's. Over time, those relationships evolved into something unusual, complicated, interdependent, a network of obligations, secrets, favors, promises, people protecting one another, people owing one another, people becoming trapped by old decisions. Then came Claire, and everything changed. The journals never explicitly identified Claire's father, but they made one thing clear. Her birth triggered panic, not because she existed, because of who might discover she existed. The adults involved agreed to hide certain facts, protect certain people, control certain narratives. The language appeared repeatedly. Control the narrative, maintain stability, protect the future. At first, I assumed the secret revolved around Claire. I was wrong. Claire was not the center. She was a consequence. The center was Emily herself. Because the journals revealed something I never imagined. Emily had spent most of her adult life maintaining multiple identities. Not fake names, not criminal aliases, different versions of herself, different histories, different truths presented to different groups. To colleagues, she was one person. To old family connections, another. To Daniel, another. To me, another. Each version contained real pieces of her life, just never the complete picture. The hidden apartment was not a love mess. It was not primarily for an affair. It functioned as a bridge, a place where those separate worlds could coexist without colliding. A controlled environment, a compartment, a life support system for decades of deception. Then I found the recording, a cassette labeled only with a date, 22 years old. Marcus found an old player. We listened together. The voices were not difficult to identify. My father, Robert, Emily, Daniel. For nearly 40 minutes they discussed plans. Not criminal plans, narrative plans. How information should be handled. What people should know. What people should never know. Who should be told certain truths. Who should be protected from them. Listening to it felt surreal, like hearing architects discuss the blueprint of a lie. Then came the sentence that shattered everything. A sentence spoken by my father. One sentence. One revelation. One complete recontextualization of my marriage. He said, eventually he will meet her, and when he does, none of this can follow them. Silence filled the room. Marcus and I looked at each other. Neither of us spoke, because we both understood exactly who he was. The conversation occurred years before I met Emily. Years before our first date. Years before our relationship began. I sat there replaying the recording again and again, trying to find another interpretation. There was not one. My father knew. Years before I met my future wife. He knew her history, knew the secrets, and believed I should never learn them. Suddenly every assumption collapsed. Maybe my relationship with Emily was not built on a lie that emerged later. Maybe the lie existed before the relationship itself. Maybe secrecy was not something that infected our marriage. Maybe secrecy was one of its foundations. Then I discovered the final document, a sealed letter, addressed to me, written by my father, dated 6 months before his death. The envelope had never been opened. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My hands were shaking when I unfolded it. Inside was a confession, not about an affair, not about Claire, not about money, something much bigger, something that finally explained why so many people spent decades protecting the same secret, and something that revealed Emily's greatest deception. The affair, the apartment, the hidden life, those were symptoms. The real secret was the reason Emily chose me in the first place. And according to my father's letter, the truth would make me question whether our entire marriage had ever been what I believed it was. I waited 3 days before reading the letter, not because I was busy, because I was afraid. For nearly a year, every discovery had expanded the mystery. Every answer had created larger questions. Now I was holding what appeared to be the final piece, and some part of me knew that once I read it, there would be no going back. I opened it alone. No Marcus, no family, no witnesses, just me. The letter was 6 pages long. My father began with an apology. Not the vague kind people write to ease their conscience. A specific apology. He apologized for helping build a lie. Then he explained everything. 25 years earlier, Emily's family had become involved in a financial disaster that threatened multiple families connected to ours. My father and Robert helped them. Daniel helped them. Over time, those relationships deepened. Complicated loyalties formed. Secrets accumulated. People began protecting one another. Then Claire was born. The circumstances surrounding her birth created conflicts, rumors, and tensions that threatened to expose everything. Nothing criminal, nothing sensational, just messy human lives. People making decisions, then making more decisions to hide those decisions. The lies multiply, years passed, and eventually an entire network of people became invested in maintaining stability rather than telling the truth. Emily grew up inside that system, learned its rules, learned that truth created consequences, learned that narratives could be managed, learned that problems could be solved by controlling information. That was the real inheritance she received. Not money, not property, secrecy. Then I reached the paragraph that finally answered the question that had haunted me for months. Why me? The answer was devastating, because the truth was both better and worse than what I would imagine. Emily did not marry me as part of a scheme. She did not target me. She did not manipulate her way into my life. She genuinely loved me. My father made that clear repeatedly. The tragedy was different. Emily loved me, but she never trusted me with the truth. Not before marriage, not during marriage, not after marriage. She wanted the life we built together, the children, the family, the future. But she also wanted complete control over which parts of herself were allowed into that life. She was not living two lives because she loved another man more. She was living two lives because she did not believe her real history could survive exposure. And after years of deception, she no longer knew how to stop the affair. It existed. That part was real. Daniel and Emily had crossed boundaries long ago. Emotional at first, physical later. But the affair was not the engine driving the story. It was one consequence of decades of compartmentalization. One more secret added to a mountain of secrets. One more lie hidden inside a larger lie. For the first time, everything made sense. The gaslighting, the defensiveness, the emotional manipulation, the sudden tears, the victimhood, the guilt, the withdrawal, the affection whenever she felt control slipping away. She was not simply protecting an affair. She was protecting an entire identity structure, a lifetime of hidden realities, a system she had spent decades maintaining. And every time I approached the truth, the system activated. Then came the final confrontation. I invited Emily to meet me in the apartment, the secret property, the place where so many worlds had intersected. She arrived already knowing. I could see it immediately. The investigation had reached her long before that meeting. There was no point pretending anymore. For nearly 4 hours we talked, not argued. Though I laid out everything. The ways, Daniel, Claire, Robert, the recordings, the journals, the letter, the photographs, the timelines, every lie, every contradiction. One by one, something unexpected happened. The manipulation never arrived. No gaslighting, no shifting blame, no attacks, no performance. For the first time since I would known her, Emily stopped managing the narrative. She simply looked tired, exhausted, deflated, and eventually she admitted the truth, not all at once, piece by piece, exactly as I had uncovered it. Every major revelation, every hidden relationship, every secret, every deception. When she finished, neither of us had much left to say, because the central question was no longer what happened. The central question was whether trust could survive after years of deliberate concealment. For me, it could not. The affair hurt, but it was not what ended the marriage. The thing that ended the marriage was realizing I would spend years negotiating with a version of my wife that she carefully curated. Whenever conflict appeared, I repaired it. Whenever concerns emerged, I minimized them. Whenever something felt wrong, I doubted myself. I was not married to a partner operating in good faith. I was married to someone managing information, managing perceptions, managing me. Our divorce was surprisingly calm, painful, but calm. No revenge, no public destruction, no war, just truth. At the end of it all, Claire reached out to me with heart. Several times, she carried wounds of her own. She would spend much of her life trapped inside the same system, the same secrecy, the same controlled narratives. In many ways, she had been a victim of it too. That realization changed something in me. Eventually, I stopped thinking about villains. People were not monsters. People were choices, and sometimes those choices compound over decades until entire lives become built around maintaining them. It's been almost 3 years now. My relationship with some family members never recovered. Others surprised me. A few people finally told the truth once they no longer had to protect it. Marcus and I remained friends. stronger friends. Actually, we survived the ugliness. As for Emily, I do not hate her. I do not even spend much time thinking about her anymore. What I feel is sadness, because beneath all the manipulation and deception, there was a person who believed truth was more dangerous than lies. And that belief ultimately cost her everything she was trying to protect. If there's one lesson I took from all this, it's simple. Love can survive mistakes. Love can survive conflict. Love can survive disappointment. What love cannot survive indefinitely is reality being replaced by narrative. Because the deepest betrayal is not always infidelity. Sometimes it's spending years beside someone only to discover they never truly allowed you to know who they were. And once that realization arrives, the mystery ends. The lies end. The confusion ends. What's left is clarity. And clarity, even when painful, is a far better foundation for life than a beautiful illusion ever was. The story has come to an end. Like, comment, share, and subscribe.